Committee member and California Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. I spoke to him just a few minutes before airtime. Congressman Schiff, what is your biggest takeaway from today's hearing?
Well, my biggest takeaway is on December 18th, the president meets with these outside, I don't know what to call them, advisors, allies, and they want to seize voting machines. They want the appointment of some kind of special counsel. And when that proposal is essentially rejected by the president's own people, hours later, in the early morning hours of the following day, is when Trump summons the mob, sends out that tweet saying it's going to be wild. It's clear that after these other efforts to overturn the election failed, his last-ditch effort was going to be to summon the mob.
What do you think was the most valuable part of Pat Cipollone's testimony, at least from the clips that were played today? Does he connect dots that no one else had been able to?
I think that he certainly underscores and corroborates much of the testimony we had about the fact that the president's own lawyers knew he lost the election, basically told him he lost the election, understood that the claims of fraud were bogus, that there was no evidence for them, understood the election was over when the Electoral College took their vote in mid-December, and basically tried to ward off a lot of what followed. And so I think he confirms a lot of that. And it's important that it comes directly from the White House counsel. These are people representing the office of the presidency, and it just corroborates how the president was told over and over again by his Justice Department, by his own White House lawyers, that these claims of fraud were completely bogus, and it goes directly to the president's knowledge and intent. He knew the claims he was making to the public were false. He continued to make them. He knew the crowd was angry on January 5th as he was listening from the Oval Office. And he knew on January 6th, if not before, they were also armed, angry and armed mob. And he urged them to march on the Capitol. And that's pretty powerful evidence.
I know you won't get into specifics. Can you characterize what people can expect to hear from Cipollone at the next hearing?
Well, I can't characterize his testimony, but I can tell you that we'll be focused on what the president was doing and, importantly, what he wasn't doing, that supreme dereliction of duty while the Capitol was being attacked. And as you heard today, when the president was finally prevailed upon to say something, it did have the effect of getting some of those people to turn around and leave the Capitol. But the fact that he couldn't or wouldn't, rather, deliver that message earlier, that he was watching this attack unfold, wasn't doing anything to stop it, even while his own vice president was trying to stop it. I think we'll go into that in much greater detail.
The focus today on the so-called Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, starting with the former president's tweet on December 19th of 2020, claiming January 6th, quote, will be wild. Why do you think they saw that as a call to arms? And do you see them and their allegiance to the former president as an ongoing threat?
I think that they look for messages continually from the president. And when the president much earlier, had said of the Proud Boys during that presidential debate, stand back and stand by, they took that as meaning something. It helped them recruit people. As we heard in today's testimony, these groups wanted to form a kind of a armed militia around the president, his own personal armed militia. This is something that comes out of Germany in the 30s, not something we would expect to see here in this country. And so I think that if there was one thing that Donald Trump understood better than probably anyone else, it is the psychology of crowds and of mobs. He derives such energy from the crowds at his rallies. He's always concerned about the size of his crowds. He knew how to direct that mob at the Capitol, and he did. And of course, people around the president understood also the participation of these dangerous people, as he ultimately did.
The Vice Chair Liz Cheney ended the hearing today alleging the former president called a witness that the public had not yet heard, but that the witness didn't answer the phone and instead alerted their attorney, who informed the committee. You're a former federal prosecutor. Is there any possible legal exposure there?
Well, it's possible. I think it would have to be in combination with other things. But I think the clear intent was to influence the witnesses' potential testimony. And so I think it's quite obvious what the president was trying to do. And whether this is actionable by the Justice Department will probably depend on a lot of other actions of the former president as it affects these witnesses. But we thought it was important to get that information out to the public, to put people on notice. We hope that if other witnesses are put in the same position by the former president, that they will also alert us to that.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thanks for your time.
Thank you.